poem called Earthworms by Lynn Ungar. Imagine, the only thing that God requires of them is a persistent, wiggling, moving forward, passing the earth through the crinkled tube of their bodies, in a motion less like chewing, more like song. Everything they encounter goes through them, as if sunsets, drugstore clerks, diesel fumes, and sidewalks were to move through our very centers and emerge subtly different for having fed us, looser somehow, more open to the possibility of life. They say the job of angels is to sing to God in serried choirs. Perhaps. But most jobs are not so glamorous. Mostly, the world depends on the silent chanting under our feet. To every grain that enters, welcome. To every parting mote, be blessed.
To every grain that enters, welcome. To every parting mote, be blessed. Lynn Ungar tells us the mantra of the earthworm. Welcome, be blessed. We might breathe into these words, knowing something fundamental in our breaths about life. Welcome, be blessed. Welcome, be blessed. On the out-breath, if you were to pause at its end, resisting that urge to breathe in once again for 5 or 10 seconds, or maybe longer, you could suddenly be reminded of the breath's necessity. Hold out a little while longer, and a panic might set in. And eventually you'd let go of this hold, welcoming again the air to your lungs. Welcome, be blessed. Every August for the past long while, First Church has breathed in an intern minister, if you'll pardon the expression. And around June, it's time to breathe them out again. It's a friendly and anticipated hello and goodbye. One that almost gives us a chance to practice how we relate to hellos and goodbyes. Now, I find myself at a time of goodbyes, this being the last time I'll lead us in worship here at South Bay. But I'm highly aware that this community has known and will know many goodbyes in this short while. It deserves our intention, and it deserves our attention. In the summer before 6th grade, my best friend, Benji, was moving away. Growing up, I was part of a trio of friends, Benji, Danny, Stevie. The kind where our families were all friends too, and we lived in the same neighborhood, and we just hung out all the time. But Benji's dad got a job in Ohio. And that night before the move came, we were at Danny's house, having a sleepover. And as dawn broke, we sat in the living room, and the most disconcerting thing happened. Danny and Benji started fighting. Like really just laying into each other, mocking each other, and eventually they were roughhousing on the couch. And I just sat there like, what are you doing? I was especially frustrated with Danny, blaming him for this. I don't know what I exactly imagined we'd be doing in those closing moments, but it was certainly not fighting. Benji's parents came a few hours later, and eventually the moving truck was driving away. Now, years later, a spiritual mentor taught me that there are different styles of goodbyes. And each of us, though it's certainly not set in stone, has a style that we might be drawn to. Think about it. We probably know in this room lots of different styles of goodbye. The style that's leaving without saying goodbye, or saying goodbye without leaving, as our dear friend Marvin K. Mooney was guilty of for quite some time. That style of goodbye that involves making the relationship much more intense than it ever was before the goodbye. Or that style where you go through grand and elaborate gestures during the goodbye. Or there's denying the goodbye. It's just good night, or see you later. Or getting in little fights during the goodbye. Or getting more and more frustrated as the goodbye approaches, as our narrator in Marvin K. Mooney was guilty of. Or downplaying or minimizing the relationship during the goodbye. Or seeking closure from everyone during the goodbye. Certainly, there are many different styles of goodbye. And in learning to recognize these styles of goodbye, I've come to understand that moment with Benji and Danny much better. Danny and Benji were dealing with leaving one another by getting in a fight. It's not that they hated each other. They were just playing out their grief as young adolescent boys may do by brawling. But what disturbed me, I think, is something that I've learned about myself. Part of my style of goodbye has to do with wanting to escalate the intensity of the relationship right before it ends. To sort of like make up for what I hadn't done in the past. So while I probably wanted to promise to Benji all the ways that we'd stay in each other's lives, which we did, by the way, I just sat on the couch horrified. The lesson more broadly that my spiritual mentor was trying to teach me was that we can both be responsible for our styles of goodbye, and we can be aware how they interact and impact others. As a side note, I just want to let you know that Benji, Danny, and I stayed close friends, even at the distance, which felt like an important piece of the puzzle to say. And it's a recognition that even if we had that kind of conflictual moment at the goodbye, that there's still life after that moment. But this is all about bringing attention and intention to the way we do goodbyes. It's not about prescribing a certain way about going about doing things. And sometimes we don't have a choice about how our goodbye will engage with the other person. Sometimes the other person doesn't afford us that opportunity. And sometimes fate or illness or catastrophe doesn't allow for it either. But in the instances we do, I think it's worth our special care. So I'd like to offer some of my appreciations on the occasion of this goodbye. It's part of what a satisfying goodbye means to me. Being with this community at South Bay has been central to my time here at First Church. I've learned deeply how much this community means to us and how precious it is to be together. From Tanya and Angela and other worship leaders, I've learned how to collaboratively plan and lead worship about traditions that might not be my home traditions, but that we honor and share and respect through worship together. I've enjoyed deep conversations and cultural exchange that has its basis in relationship. This is the root, I think, of the multi-generational and multicultural community we make together here in South Bay. From Lorelei and our musicians, I've expanded a sense of how music weaves into our worship and the diversity of sources and approaches to song that make our time here on Sunday mornings so rich. With our third Wednesday South Bay Wisdom Circle. I've been startled and uplifted by the depth of sharing and understanding that we've cultivated across the course of the year. And in carrying of one another's stories, come to know the true wisdom of one another's perspectives and experiences. I remember fondly our tamalada and our little posada, and the way Everardo's voice accompanies us throughout worship, and the delicious social hour spread that is not just a volunteer obligation, but true hospitality. You are the people who invited me into your homes or gone on walks with me. You've told me that a sermon was a thinker, which probably meant that I probably had some more thinking to do about the sermon.
Oh.
You've put up with my stumbling Spanish and a thick gringo accent. You've let me grow and supported me when I've fallen short. When I was away for too many weekends in a row, I always looked forward to coming back. Being here in these few storefront addresses feels like home. This community makes it so. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, both Marvin K. Mooney and the non-attached earthworm from Lynn Unger's poem teach me something about goodbyes, about the finality and the closure that's in a goodbye. In Marvin K. Mooney's case, my favorite line is the last one. The time had come. So Marvin went. It's simple. It's fitting. A contrast to the increasingly hostile and inventive commands coming from our narrator. But that starkness of goodbyes, that there will be finality, sometimes spooks me. Perhaps it spooks you too. Perhaps it might seep into the present of our being together, knowing that eventually there will be a leaving. Teachers might feel this in their early years of teaching especially, having to say goodbye to a class that meant so much to them and not sure if they ever will be able to feel the care for their next class. And coworkers might feel this when a colleague has left for another job, when the stress of the work they face together has become too much for one. Ex-partners and former romantic pairs may feel this too, the weight of a breakup bearing so heavily on any future possibility for companionship. In all these cases, and others that we might imagine or remember together, that uncertainty of future, or to put it conversely, that certainty of change, may crucially undermine our ability to build trust anew, or to hold on to trust, or to rebuild it when it's broken. A line here from Mary Oliver's poem In Blackwater Woods comes to mind. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing that your own life depends upon it, and when the time comes, to let it go. This, my friends, might be the terms of a trusting goodbye. When the time comes to let it go, to let it go. Sometimes we might not agree that it's time to go. Sometimes working through the irresolution of a goodbye may take us weeks, or months, or years. It's okay. Of course it will. But when the time comes to go, to let it go, let it go. Welcome. Be blessed. I wonder how our losses, our goodbyes in this community, in First Church, have impacted our ability to keep building the trust that is so crucial to a covenantal religious community like ours. How does the goodbyes of before seep into our present moment here together? And how do we face that together? Of course, I've been thinking about trust here at First Parish all year. So many of my sermons I've offered as I look back and realize had to do with trust and distrust. Among other occurrences, the past year in the life of this larger congregation has been somewhat tumultuous. There was a stirring, a deeper, not yet fully realized effort to work against a culture of white supremacy in our congregation. These were not new realizations for some, and this was not the first time people set to this work. But there was this stirring, a new set of voices and a new way of expressing the urgency of undoing racism. And that work is so crucial to our faith and the way we are in community together. So in the surfacing, in the making known, in the waking up, of course, conflict and disagreement will arise. Of course. It became so clear to me that in the face of being in conflict, in order for the community to not become more entrenched or more at odds with one another, there needed to be a common shared trust holding us together. Fundamentally, it is a trust that while we remain in conflict, we aspire to remain together through it. And an attention to what greater than ourselves holds us together. So when a conflict becomes so painful that some leave, when absorbing a goodbye that lingers and hurts us, the possibility of this covenantal trust can feel more bleak. Welcome. Be blessed. And yet, I've also seen the turning towards renewal and repair of relationship, the turning towards more equity in relationships, more awareness to what will be the bedrock of a more deeply held religious community. I have hope in the future of this community I've been with this year. There are big moments like the board's leadership clarifying and honing in on a vision of inclusivity, and especially the work of the board's Journey Towards Wholeness team. But there are other moments that I didn't see. Times when members of this community got together to work on their relationships together. Times when people dug down into their spiritual practices, emerging more renewed to see again with both commitment and compassion a way forward. It's become so clear to me the value of every day being together in community, the ways that we certainly need to talk about these big questions of how are we to be together. We certainly do, but we also just need to be together. If trust is a feeling still tentative, if you're not sure yet that there's hope in some way forward, I ask you to still be here, that we need you here. At lunch with a member of South Bay this past week, I was reminded of a special quality of this community. It's the way we notice one another's presence, and therefore we notice our absences. This member had perfectly good reasons for being away from Sunday worship at South Bay for 2 weeks running. But in any case, this member heard from Carla, who reached out to see if everything was all right. When you go, know that you're missed and you're noticed, that your presence matters. I smile to myself about goodbyes, the way I like to do them, saying things on my heart and need to say to approach some closure. And I always find myself falling short. Goodbyes can be a reminder to say the things on our heart to one another, long before a goodbye is anticipated. That if we live in the way where we trust goodbyes, that if we trust in both the certainty of change, but also a trust in that which remains while all is changing, we might more fully realize that line from Mary Oliver. To love what is mortal, to hold it against our bones, knowing our own life depends on it. That we depend upon each other. Dependence brings about the bittersweetness of community, of being mortal and loving the world in such a way that trust can arise and loss can mean something. May we welcome the possibilities of deepening trust, of thoughtful engagement and caring commitment. May we bless the work of our hands, letting go of what's ready to go, and let Spirit guide our way forward anew. Welcome. Be blessed. Amen, and blessed be. And would you all rise and sing with me again our closing Rising Green?